Hello, and welcome to Your Vote Counts, a public, informational, nonpartisan program designed to get the public acquainted with the candidates vying for the 2024 general election races of Kaiser City Mayor, Kaiser City Council, Marion County Sheriff, Senate District 9, House Districts 7 through 23, and Congressional Districts 5 and 6. These interviews come to you through the producers at Capital Community Media with collaboration on questions and moderators from American Association of University Women and the League of Women Voters of Marion and Polk Counties. All candidates for these races were invited, and 65% chose to participate. Candidates did not receive the questions prepared by the League of Women Voters ahead of time. Candidates were invited to prepare a 2-minute opening addressing their background and qualifications for the office and 2-minute closing remarks. Let's get started. I am Mickey Varney from the League of Women Voters of Marion and Polk Counties, and I would like to introduce candidate Ashland, who is running for Senate District 9. Candidate Ashland, welcome, and we look forward to your opening remarks. You have 2 minutes.
Well, thank you. Originally, my son was going to run for this position. Multiple combat deployments, incredible background, dynamic. A change in his employment meant that he couldn't do it. And eventually I was asked to fill in because I'd worked with him for a couple of years on this project. I've worked in candidacies from governors to senators in California to running several campaigns here and locally in Silverton. I've always sort of wanted to run, but never had the fire in my belly for it until this year. I have a granddaughter in school, public school. She's in a building that's condemned. They just laid off, I think, 83 teachers in our school district. And primarily it was because of a lack of funding. And I've heard a lot of reasons for lack of funding. Most of it blamed on the timber industry being limited in what they could do. And doing my research on that was not true. The fact is that income from corporations and wealthy people has, since 1980, has decreased every year. And we're sitting on gigantic school deficits, not because of the timber industry, but because we as a state bought into the trickle-down economics that has failed the last 40 years. So for me, it's primarily about education, full funding of the school, fair and equitable taxation of corporations and the wealthy, and other issues, which hopefully we'll touch on later, which includes guns and housing and things like that. But education is where I'm going to be putting most of my effort.
Okay, well, thank you very much for that introduction. And now we'd like to hear your views on some questions for this interview. First of all, what, if any, modifications would you recommend to our current climate policy?
Well, I think that I would like to take another crack at the word's escaping me. It's the credits for using petroleum-based energy. It's the reason the Republicans walked out recently. Cap and trade, I think we ought to revisit it. Number one, I think we ought to make sure we get full investment in electric car chargers. We ought to continue, if not expand, the credits for solar, electric vehicles. And in the end, I think most of it is about individually getting the information to homes on how they can make their homes more economical with the help of state resources. I live in a house built out of hay. We've driven an electric car for 9 years. So we're really committed to sustainability and clean living.
Well, thank you for those answers. Next question. How will you respond to any challenges presented to Oregon's election system? What are your views on protection of voter rights?
Oof. Well, first of all, I'd like to reiterate what we all ought to know, and that is that voter fraud is really uh, unknown in our voting system. The smokescreens put up about protecting our voting rights have been used to actually shut down voting rights in Oregon and across the country. I do think that extending education and an ease of applying should go to all residents of Oregon. And I don't care whether that is just green carded people or citizens. I think everyone who's here legally should have the opportunity not just to vote, but an easy way to register to vote and voting options that well, we're the only state that's all mail, and I think that's part of the solution for making sure everyone votes. So um, I would say Oregon just should not fall into the fear of voter fraud. It's a smokescreen that doesn't really exist.
Okay, thank you. What elements do you support to ensure financial stability in Oregon's future?
Well, without question, we have since 1980, we've been reducing corporate taxes or we've given them loopholes enough to avoid paying taxes. And the same is true with wealthy. In fact, at a uh, gathering I did yesterday, I held up a chart that showed the income from corporations to our state, the income from 1% wealthy people, and a line for the rest of us. The line for the rest of us was even. The others looked like volcanic craters. And we've had 40 years of cutting taxes, and that's really been embraced by Democrats, Republicans, even independents. That seems to be the coin of the realm in elections. We need to go back to full funding. We need to go back to fair and equitable taxation. I think that's going to be really hard because of our campaign contribution setups, where people who have a vested interest in keeping the system the way it is give the most money. They have the most, they give the most, they control the most. So I do think we need to eliminate some of the campaign contributions, the levels of campaign contributions to corporations and wealthy can give. I know that feels like a lack of free speech, but we often have to give up free speech for equity and for justice.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, we earlier talked a little bit about current climate policy. I'm curious when it comes to energy now. Looking at the next 20 years, what should be in energy plans and policy? Do they include specific conservation strategies? And looking at the current model of energy grids.
Well, I think that we ought to eliminate natural gas as an energy source in all new buildings. I think all new buildings should be required to have either solar or some suitable alternative. There are other devices and methods for collecting energy from wind and from light and even from darkness. And we ought to be on the forefront with the wonderful university systems we have here on developing those and shoving them out into the uh, uh, building new housing and the codes for building new apartments and new housing. Our biggest problem, though, is existing houses that are operating on gas, often wood stoves. And I think we're going to have to cut those out. We're going to have to sunset our uh, freedom to use any energy source. Uh, Obviously, that's going to have to be down the road. It's going to have to be 3, 4, 5 years out. It's going to need to be subsidized. We're going to need to subsidize also uh, the move from gasoline powered and diesel powered cars to electric. Um, our problem will not be so much getting new cars to be electric, but it's going to be replacing the gas and diesel fueled vehicles that are out there. And everyone's going to ask, well, what do I do with my old car? How can I afford a new EV? We have to solve that problem. That's an economic problem. But I would say this, that if we were justly and evenly distributing the tax liability in this state, we'd be able to do all that and more.
Makes sense. Thank you. Well, we've seen an increasing number of wildfires year after year after year. So with the increasing demand for funds to fight that increased number of fires, the Oregon Department of Forestry has reduced their funds for jobs such as summer hires, contractors, trail maintenance, engineers, and firefighters. The agency would typically hire more than 1,000 seasonal workers to staff 11 national forests in Oregon. So, how do we address a budget to balance this increasing need with the availability of funds?
I don't want to whip this horse about just and fair and equal taxation, but almost everything that I'm asked about it at forums and by voters involves revenue. And in Oregon, our revenue is way out of whack. So we're not going to solve any of these problems until we get to just taxation. But let me talk about the wildfires. We should be adding to, not decreasing our funding levels, our employment levels, the staffing that we have for fire mitigation and for fire fighting. I think there's another issue, though, that is a little bit like the older gasoline cars being replaced by electric. We need to stop allowing building permits and residences in places that are in absolutely high-risk wildfire areas. To me, it's no different than giving building permits for people to live on the coast in tidal zone areas. What we're doing is setting up a situation where insurance eventually is going to bail on these areas, and then we're going to be left with people asking for state based insurance to cover these. And I think we make a huge mistake by building in flood zones, building in tidal zones, building in wildfire high-risk areas. But until we get there, we need to protect the people who are there, and we need to establish funding for it. And there are ways for us to increase our revenue. And that's really the biggest solution to the problem.
Okay, thank you. Let's switch gears a bit and talk about healthcare. Recently, Oregon established a legislative advisory group to address healthcare initiatives such as the Affordable Care Act, Oregon's Basic Health Plan, and Healthcare for All. What do you see happening with this interplay between these groups?
I think that the ability for healthcare and pharmaceutical companies to put money into political campaigns is probably the biggest inhibiting factor. So that's like full funding and taxation. That needs to be solved. We're one of the only Western countries that allows for making profit from healthcare and pharmaceuticals. Most of the rest of the Western nations make it illegal for companies to profit from healthcare and from pharmaceuticals. I'm not sure we can do something about that at the state level, but the efforts for universal healthcare, even Oregon becoming the first place to actually implement universal healthcare, it would be awesome. I would, and I will fully support that. I'm pretty familiar with the work done in those areas, and they've been working for, gosh, I think it's probably 15 years on this. And I think it's time for us to get serious about how to move this legislation. And that means voting for and electing people like me who will support those movements. Unfortunately, the money in campaigns moves people away from those people and towards people who are most supportive of corporate interests and corporate profits.
Okay, thanks. Well, let's see if we can squeeze in a quick question here about education. So, what changes, if any, do you see in the future of education, and how could this affect Oregon?
Well, I think on the trajectory we're at right now, I think we are going to be moving down the scale in states in the United States and countries in the world with fine education levels we're going to keep moving down. Part of that is because our financing system for schools has been predicated on property taxes, which means that if you live in Lake Oswego, you're going to have better schools than if you live in Gervais. And that's just simply a squandering of the resources of people who live in rural areas and smaller population centers. So moving away from that and moving to state-funded, equity-based education. I also think that there's a threat to education in Oregon from the people who want to spread the money to charter and nonprofit schools and non-district schools. I think that's a cancer that eats away from public education. Education is our investment in the seeds of agriculture. And if we don't spend money, we got no crops. And that's where we're going.
Thanks. Well, we're at the end of the question portion. So moving to the last segment here, candidate Ashland, you're now invited to share your 2-minute closing comments about your goals for this office if elected, or other remarks you wish to share. Please also share your contact information so the public can reach out to you.
MikeAshland.com is how to find me and to donate and to check into my positions. District 9, Senate District 9 has been represented by Fred Gerard, who is a patriot, somebody who lost their house in the wildfires, somebody I admire. But he is a Republican in a blue state. And I looked back at all of his legislation. And the thing that shows up most when you look at the list of legislation that has been handled is dead. The word dead means that the large Republican base in District 9, about 2/3 of the voters are Republican, are represented by a minority leader. And the reality is that we are living in a system where everyone needs to be represented. That is what I'm offering before anything else. And that is to make sure that we compromise between Republicans and Democrats, that I am an agent and a catalyst to make that happen. One of the pieces of legislation that didn't pass allowed rural farmers to build additional homes on their property for their family members. I have not talked to a Democrat who wouldn't support it, but it did not pass. It was killed by Democrats, and I'm a Democrat. And I think it might have been killed in part because Republicans in rural Oregon was really the energy behind it. I think we could have found a way to pass that. And there are dozens and dozens of pieces of legislation that could pass in this state that would also represent Republicans. They're not all evil, and we're not always right. So more than anything else, I want to be an agent for compromise.
Well, thank you very much, candidate Ashland, for our interview today and for sharing your thoughts on these important issues.
Thank you, Ashley.
And I want, thanks. And I wanted to say thank you to Capital Community Media for their extensive technology and production skills used to create this program. Thank you to the League of Women Voters of Marion and Polk counties for the design and preparation of the program. And thanks to you, the public, for watching in order to become a more informed voter. For more local, state, and national voter information on candidates and ballot issues, visit vote411.org after September 30th when candidate data is posted. You have until October 15th to register to vote or to make changes to your voter registration. Ballots go out on October 16th and will be accepted and counted if postmarked before or on November 5th. Elections matter. Remember to vote because your vote counts.